Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Festival of Ideas Online. My name's Andrew Kelly from Bristol Festival of Ideas, and we're very grateful to you for tuning in today. We're honoured to have with us Jenny Kleeman, journalist and documentary filmmaker, Times Radio broadcaster, and now the author of Sex Robots and Vegan Meat, Adventures at the Frontier of Birth, Food, Sex and Death. If you'd like to give us questions to ask, there's an Ask a Question button you can link to on your screen. And similarly, in the chat, do tell us where you're from and any thoughts on the event. Just to let you know that we might be discussing some things which may make some people uncomfortable. If you are affected by anything that we've discussed, there are various organisations in the chat and on our website that you can talk to. But thank you again, and thank you very much, Jenny, for joining us today. Jenny, I wanted to start, Jenny. You talk about how technology is redefining pretty much every aspect of our lives, particularly in this book, Birth, Death, Food and Sex. Can you take us through each of these in turn and just tell us briefly about some of the things that you found in your years of research and writing this book?
Of course. So the book is in 4 sections, as you say: birth, food, sex and death. And each of them looks at one innovation that has the potential to change the way that we're born, that we eat, that we have relationships and how we die. And the thesis behind it is these are the fundamental elements of human existence. They've always been largely beyond our control until now. We are now on the cusp of an age where technology will be able to redefine what it means to be human by giving us control over the hitherto uncontrollable. So the 4 innovations that I look at in the book, the sex is sex robots. What if you could have the perfect partner that's exactly how you want them to be in terms of how they look and their personality? What if you could have a partner that exists just for you? Food is about lab-grown meat. What if we could all eat meat without killing animals? How would that change how we live? Birth is about artificial wombs. What if we could have babies without anyone being pregnant, if we could grow babies outside the human body? And death is about euthanasia machines that promise the perfect death, that promise to be able to give you a painless death at the time of your choosing, in a way that you entirely control.
So let's go into these in a bit more detail, and we'll go in the order that you mentioned. I mean, the word perfect keeps coming up when people search for perfection, and that's perfection on the part of the people who are pushing these, as well as our own vulnerabilities or the need to find solutions to some issues we have. But if you take sex robots, these are generally very much pushed by men and very much used by men. In fact, there are very few or even female sex robots. That's right, isn't it?
Well, the people who are making sex robots at the moment, they come from the same factories of people who make sex dolls, hyper-realistic sex dolls. And these are pretty much all female sex dolls. There are male sex dolls that you can buy, but the people who buy them are generally gay men. Women don't tend to buy this stuff. So I went to a factory where some incredibly impressive, hyper-realistic, highly customizable sex dolls are made. There are 42 different kinds of nipple to choose between, 14 different styles of labia. You can specify where you want each individual freckle on the body. You can have the hairs individually punched wherever you want the doll to be hairy or not. And they are putting animatronics and artificial intelligence into these robots to give them a personality that you can also customize to a similar extent. But yes, by and large, with all of these inventions, they are driven by men and generally for men.
And we're talking about potentially huge sums of money, aren't we? Not just in terms of sex robots, but in terms of all 4 areas that you discussed, but particularly this and food, I think.
Yes, I mean, food, the global meat market is worth trillions of dollars. If you can take a tiny piece of that, a dent of that, you can make an enormous amount of money. And the same goes with sex robots. I mean, the sex dolls that are being made at the moment, the convincing ones are, they start at about $8,000 and they go up to tens of thousands of dollars if you've got very unusual specifications. If you put in the necessarily the necessary robotics inside, the animatronics and artificial intelligence. At the moment, you can buy a robotic head that will talk to you and move and smile and wink and all of the rest of it. And that you put on a doll's body. The head itself costs $15,000. So it's expensive stuff. And all of these products that I look at in the book will be elite products, at least at first. But the people making them claim that they're not doing it for money, they're doing it for principle, and they're doing it to democratize this incredible technology and ultimately make it available to everyone. Whether or not that will actually be the case is open to question, I'd say.
Because the good intentions behind these, you know, people talk about, therefore, lonely people,
yes,
who might have disabilities, that the socially awkward, and indeed the bereaved as well. But
yes,
you know, the truth of that and what results is a very different matter, I suspect.
Yes, the people who are making these sex robots saying they're creating companionship to people who otherwise would never have companionship. And I interviewed some people who fall into that category and who made quite a moving and convincing case for why these things should exist. But not everybody is like that. And the people who make the robots and the dolls that are currently, you know, booming business at the moment, they know that. They know that not everybody is like that. They're not there to provide companionship to the lonely. If they were, then perhaps they'd be visiting old people in old people's homes instead of making silicon sex dolls. But yeah, the people who are making them because they want to be famous, they want validation, they want fame, and they want to make a lot of money. And that was something that ran through the entire book, was the egos of people who are trying to control birth, food, sex, and death. And what are the unintended consequences of their ambitions and their pursuit of recognition and validation?
And I mean, there was a rather chilling moment in the book where you went to, I think it was Las Vegas, and to a trade show, I think, where you spoke to some men who had sex robots, but were also married as well, or had partners.
Yes.
And
I in fact, I was in an online forum. It was before I went to Las Vegas. I was in an online forum.
Oh, right, yeah.
There was a robot inventor who was canvassing opinions about what should he be including in his prototypes. And all these men were saying, you don't need to make it walk. It's more important that they're at body temperature. And if you can make it look like they're breathing, that would be good. But a lot of them, they were saying things like, if I could find a robot that could cook and clean as well as having sex with me, I'd dump my girlfriend immediately and not be with her. And quite often these people had these dolls and robots because they wanted to do things to them that they couldn't do to a human being. So yes, they're not all lovely, warm people who are, acting out a niche fantasy. Quite often there's some quite dark people who are interested in this kind of technology.
And moving on to clean meat, as it's called, although that's a title which
yes,
tend to avoid later on. You contrast the horrors of factory farming, and particularly where you went to in the United States, which is called Auschwitz, and with this, and surely, I mean, there is potential here in a sense, isn't there, of reducing the reliance on factory farming and so on.
It's a very seductive idea, this idea that we can carry on eating meat as much as before, but instead of killing animals for it, we can grow it in a lab instead of the body of an animal. And there's a very pressing problem caused by our overconsumption of meat and global population increases. We might think that more of us are turning vegan than ever before, but that might not be true. And it's certainly not true in developing countries. It's not true in China. It's not true in India. We have an enormous appetite for meat, and industrial agriculture is an enormous contributor to climate change. It's a major cause of antibiotic resistance. Something like 70% of all the antibiotics in the United States are given to animals that aren't even sick, just prophylactically to stop them from getting ill when they're crammed so close together. It causes water pollution. It's a huge, it's very wasteful in terms of land usage. So I begin that section of the book as a committed carnivore, as someone who loves eating meat, kind of breaking down why it is completely indefensible to eat meat. And in an age where we can get all the nutrition we need from plants and from vitamin supplements, there really is no reason to eat meat, or certainly not at the level that we're eating it now. And all of those reasons are not animal rights reasons. The animal rights movement, or certainly the people who I look at in my book, because the lab-grown meat industry is by and large run by and funded by vegans who keep it quite quiet that they're vegan, they have all kind of come to this conclusion that the animal rights argument for going vegan isn't convincing people. And that if you want to convince people to go vegan, you need to talk about the damage to the planet and the damage to our bodies from eating meat. And also that even that isn't going to sway people. The way to sway people is to give them what they want, give them meat, but produce it in a different way that doesn't involve killing animals. So, I mean, it's actually quite a seductive argument. It's quite a convincing argument that you think if we can do this, then it's problem solved. We can carry on as before and not worry. And in fact, when I was doing the reporting for that part of the book, I interviewed a very impressive, very, very impressive, very committed, passionate man who at first I thought, well, maybe there's nothing really to investigate here. Maybe this just is the answer and I'm in the presence of someone who's going to win a Nobel Prize one day. But when I dug a little deeper, I saw that there is something problematic in promising people they can continue as normal by eating this lab-grown meat, that there is no such thing as the perfect meat. And that actually, when you think about it, it's kind of ridiculous overshoot engineering to be growing meat in a lab when we could just be eating a little bit less meat, eating it once or twice a week instead of every day.
I'm glad you used the term overshoot engineering because it comes up in that section, but seemed to apply right across the board, really, in terms of. Wait a minute. Just a couple of other questions on this. The first is, I really hadn't. I'd read a lot about vegan meat and so on. I didn't quite realise how actually to start the process with fetal bovine serum. It's actually quite cruel, isn't it, to do this?
Yes, and it's important to say that at the moment, the people who are growing this meat in labs are trying to move away from this substance. But the way that you grow meat in a lab is you take a biopsy from a living animal, and I ate a chicken nugget that comes from a chicken called Ian, who's still alive today. You take a biopsy from a living animal, it's the size of a sesame seed, and then you bathe it in a nutrient bath. You put it in a petri dish, and this special medium makes the cells reproduce, proliferate, and you grow a clump of cells, and then you put them in a bioreactor, they grow more and more and more, and eventually you have a massive tissue that you can eat. But the medium itself is the problem. The medium that is most conducive to making the cells grow and multiply is called fetal bovine serum. And you might be able to guess from the name that it comes from the serum of the blood of unborn calves. And in fact, the way they get it is they kill pregnant cows in an abattoir and they put a needle into the heart, the beating heart of a calf fetus, and extract its blood. And from this, they produce the serum. And it's incredibly, it's like the least vegan substance on earth. And so this entire industry was predicated on growing these cells in this way. And the companies realize that that's completely unsustainable, if for no other reason than it's really expensive, this medium. And it's part of the reason why lab-grown meat is so expensive. But also, it's just won't wash with consumers if you're promising something that's, ethically perfect. So they're trying to produce alternatives, and they have had some success, but nothing is as good as this fetal bovine serum. So they're all kind of still a little bit dependent on it.
And then you talked about the chicken nugget, which was particularly repulsive. Yes. You also ate. Was it an egg? I can't.
I ate a plant-based egg, so it wasn't lab-grown egg, but it came from the same company. And the theory, what's really interesting is this company creates plant-based meat alternatives and also lab-grown meat. But the plant-based, all things like Beyond Burgers you might have heard of, or Impossible Burgers, which are plant-based, are in fact veggie burgers. But they're being sold to us as not as veggie burgers, because venture capitalists in Silicon Valley don't invest in veggie burgers, but they invest in companies that say we've hacked eggs, we've hacked the molecular properties of eggs, and we can now replicate them by using proteins from seeds and doing the same thing. But it was a lot of smoke and mirrors, basically. And I had this kind of grand display in San Francisco, which in the end ended up being a little bit underwhelming.
And was this where they cooked it in butter as well? Vegans were cooked.
They made me this scrambled egg from this stuff that really looked like egg and cooked like egg and had the texture of egg. They fried it in butter, and I said, "What are you doing frying it in butter?" And they're like, "Oh, that's how most people have scrambled egg. It doesn't hurt. And I was thinking, what? This is a vegan company and you're cooking it in butter. And they put some special sulfurous salt on it and black pepper. And when I tasted it, I realized why they'd fried it in butter, which is as much as it looked like egg and cooked like egg, it tasted of nothing at all apart from the butter and the sulfurous salt. So, you know, they haven't really worked out how to recreate an egg without it coming from a chicken.
I'm going to come on to audience questions in a moment. So if you've got any more, please add them in. We've got a couple that have been asked so far. But just to go through the other two areas, the third perfect area is the perfect birth, and this is, you know, where, you know, women are under pressure both to start families, but also to maintain careers and so on. And we've seen the pictures of the lamb in the bag and so on. Tell us a little bit about how that might develop further.
It comes from the idea that the one remaining inequality between the sexes, by anyone's account, is the fact that women need to use their bodies to reproduce much more than men do. Men just provide the cells you need to get things started. Women provide the cells, but they also have to provide their bodies to incubate the babies. And there is a growing number of women, as the surrogacy industry shows, there are a growing number of women who want their own biological children but don't want to be pregnant with them and will actually use surrogates for no medical reason. I interviewed some dodgy fertility doctors who provide that service. But I was looking at the different applications for this technology. These they're called biobags. They're effectively Ziploc bags with man-made amniotic fluid inside and a synthetic placenta, which is the kind of tubes that plug into the lamb's umbilical cords. That they've managed to gestate lamb fetuses in these bags for several weeks, and then they open the bag, they clamp the cord, and the lambs emerge no different from lambs that have grown inside pregnant ewes. And these technologies have been developed to save very premature babies, because at the moment, if you have a baby that's premature, it's treated like a newborn. It's put in an incubator and given what it needs to continue living, like it's helped with its breathing, but the process of gestation doesn't continue. The biobags allow the process of gestation to continue. So in the images of the lambs, this is created in the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The first few pictures, the lambs are very much fetuses. They're hairless and pink. Their eyes are shut. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, they've grown coils of wool. Their eyes open. You know, they're swallowing and moving, completely independent of a mother. So at the moment, you can replace pregnancy from the middle of the second trimester onwards. It's not a complete replacement for pregnancy, but as we get better at extending the lives of embryos conceived through IVF, there will come a point in the future when the entire process of gestation will take place outside the body. So this looked at how this will result in complete equality between the sexes. Both men and women just need to provide the gametes, the cells to get things started. And how is that going to affect? It's mainly going to affect women and our role if this technology exists. And of all of the 4 sections of my book, this was the one that terrified me the most. And this was the one that exposed the gulf between a perfect world where this technology is used for good and is used to save premature babies and help people who can't be pregnant, and the real world where there are many definitions of what a bad mother is and what inappropriate behavior in pregnancy is, and that this technology could be used to disenfranchise women and to marginalise women. And
the final area, just before we come on to audience questions, is about the perfect death. And when I was reading this, and I you saw various machines that are being created or planned. Some of the organisations, I have to say, didn't particularly come out well from this section of the book at all. I don't want to go too much into this because it can be quite upsetting, really. But the answer, surely, with all of these, is that we have to focus on what we can do rather than to search out technological solutions to these things.
The conclusion that I came to is that all of these bits of technology promise us solutions, but they're not solutions. They're circumventions. They stop us from doing the kind of intellectual work required to obtain change by other means. You know, we could all just accept compromise in our relationships and reach out to lonely people more. We could all eat less meat. We could all make it easier for women to be pregnant and have babies. We could work on legislation that legalizes the right to die, or we could make death less frightening by investing in palliative care and in research into many of the conditions that make the prospect of death so frightening for so many people. But that requires effort and work. And entrepreneurs know that they can make money by offering us a technical fix, an off-the-shelf solution that's easier. And we don't need to buy it. We still have the power at the moment, before these technologies exist, to decide that we don't want them or we don't need them, and we're going to change our behavior anyway in order to make the changes that these technologies promise to deliver for us.
Do you think we're good at this though? Are we trying to find an easier solution? These are not easy solutions at all, because they take a lot of money and a lot of time to develop. But do you think we're almost capable? I mean, you give your own example of how, you know, you found it, you realize the meat industry is unsustainable, it's cruel and so on, but you still enjoy a steak and so on. And I mean, we're all inconsistent really in that way.
We are, but you don't have to be perfect. And you know, I now, having done the research on this, I eat a lot less meat. You know, I have actively changed my behavior. And the point is, you know, these are all, you don't have to be kind of one way or another. You can make small changes that create the world that we all want to live in. And I think we live in a capitalist system that assumes that we're all selfish and a bit greedy. That's the default assumption. And all of these technologies assume that we want to have our cake and eat it, that we want to not have to compromise and have an easy life. But I think I don't believe in that conceptualization of human beings. And I think the lockdown has really shown how human beings are capable of not only changing our behavior drastically and very quickly when we need to, but also behaving for the good of everybody else. You know, here is a disease that disproportionately affects some people rather than others. And yet, by and large, we had people complying, staying in, people wearing masks on the tube, I see every day. And people are not just driven by selfish desires and greed. We are capable of more. It's just the system that we live in now assumes that's all we are.
I want us, there's a couple of questions that people have asked if we can check in with you. But the first is about sex robots. Sian from Bristol. She's reported quite a lot about sex robots for the New Statesman. And do you worry that they risk normalising male sexual entitlement and sexual violence? She remembers reporting one where men broke a sex robot's fingers at a trade fair, for example.
So that is a sex robot made by a man called Sergei Santos. And actually the stories of what happened at that trade fair are debatable. A lot of the stories about sex robots are about the stories we want to tell rather than the actual truth of what happened. And quite often journalists overstate what these robots are capable of because they want to campaign against them or be shocked by them or delighted by them. The Daily Star is writing vast things about my book at the moment because they want to suggest that you'll be able to buy Pris from Blade Runner and have sex with her tomorrow. None of these things necessarily are true. It is certainly a case that some people will buy sex robots in order to enact sexual violence on them. They're very expensive, so I don't think there'll be a lot of people beating them up. And also, I think a robot that can kind of talk and speak, I mean, maybe some people would get a thrill out of that. For me, the danger of sex robots is not so much that, although that is a really big danger. I think there is a small number of men who sex robots might appeal to them for that reason. For me, the danger of sex robots is the normalization of a relationship where only one half of the partnership matters, where only what one person wants is what goes. When we get used to having relationships with something that always laughs at our jokes, always wants to have sex whenever we want to have sex, doesn't have periods, doesn't have annoying friends, always wants what we want. I think empathy with other human beings will start to be hard work or harder work, and some people will withdraw from having those relationships, and not just the socially awkward people who might want them in the first place. We know how we're all addicted to our phones. Nobody could have foreseen that. Imagine a future where you have that level of technology, but a lot more and a lot more convincing in a human package that can sit on your sofa and watch TV with you and talk to you. So I think there is a broader danger. Obviously, sex robots are a very bad idea for women, but they're bad for men too, in a world where empathy becomes more like hard work.
Another question is about, and it comes into the very heart of the book, really, the whole nature of both being human, but also things like transhumanism and so on. The author, the questioner was asking, did you look into transhumanism and some of the things that are discussed there?
I did. I mean, I've been interested in this area for a long time, and so I looked at lots of different aspects of transhumanism. I went to lots of meetings with transhumanists. They're very interested in, obviously, in all of these technologies. Quite a lot of people who are very into transhumanism do their research very well and are aware of the hype around all of these 4 areas and the extent to which, no matter what the people making these technologies say, they're not quite ready for market yet. So they're quite skeptical about it. But the idea of, incorporating technologies into your body or life extension, I'm very, very interested in. But I'm interested in these things in as far as what they tell us about how we all live and our general attitude to death. Like, death is so frightening that you want to delay it, even if it means living a life of severe calorie restriction and not having any fun and not having any children, because that makes you live a shorter period of time. Makes me think, is that a life worth extending? So I'm always interested in these kind of quite extreme ideas or extreme approaches that can tell us all something about how we're living in the middle, if you know what I mean.
And linked to the question that someone's asked, but linked to something else I was going to ask you about, is about how, why can't we accept that certain things are vulnerable, imperfections and so on? We seem to search for the perfect or want this, and this is coming up in some of the technologies that we have. Are we, I always remember someone said to me once when I was doing a project, nothing to do with your book, but saying, well, perfect is the enemy of the good, and yes. In a way that is quite a good term to use in these senses, really. Absolutely.
And transhumanism assumes that human beings are imperfect, that we're a constant project to be improved, and transhumanism assumes that technology is going to solve all of those problems instead of celebrating them. And some of the best things about humanity come from situations where we've had to adapt to our lack of control. And again, I talk about what's happened this year. We are learning so much about ourselves because we are forced to adapt to how imperfect our bodies are. We have no defenses against this virus, and hopefully we will be able to learn something about us as social beings from the way that we've responded to this.
Just talking about, none of these things exist yet in the sense they've come to market or whatever, although some of the kits that in the chapter on the good death were
the sex robots, since I wrote the book, are now, so Abyss Creations head is now on the market.
Right.
But
okay.
None of the things, if you visualize what I'm talking about as a robot who can walk around and be your partner, or an artificial womb, none of them are on the market yet.
No, but they're coming, aren't they? They're at some point there. And what kind of timescale would you put on that? For example, your ability to go into a restaurant and order a clean steak or something like that.
Clean steak is a bit far off because the steaks are tissues. So what the things that will be on the market first are burgers and nuggets and sausages, because they're all masses of tissue. They don't have to have cartilage and fat in order to be in the correct configuration. We're really close to that. The question is, when will there be a product that is the same price as meat grown in an animal and tastes the same? We're probably about 4 years off that. But there are a lot of very smart people, and some of them are really idealistic, good people trying to make that happen. A steak that is indistinguishable from an actual steak, I think we're at least a decade off that happening. But lab-grown meat, we're very close to there being something on the market. And in fact, there are burgers in 2013. That was when the first lab-grown burger was produced. It just cost 330,000 euros. So there's no way that it was going on the market yet. But now a lab-grown burger costs about €9, $10 at the moment. But they're not going to put it on the market until it's cheaper. Sex robots are already on the market in one form or another, varying degrees of success. Some people have put what's effectively a mannequin with Siri in their head and a speaker and called it a sex robot, and you can buy those things now. Artificial wombs were at least a generation away from full replacement for pregnancy, but it's going to happen. And yes, the death machines are already available in one form or another, but I would argue that we don't ever need them.
Yeah, and that's the final point I wanted to ask you about, which links to a final question, is about the need as against what we can do ourselves. I mean, I think I've long, for example, been a supporter of legislation which allows, a better death than some people can have of their own choosing. Personally, I'm a vegan. I've been for a long time. I don't actually want to eat an artificial meat because I like the plant-based food so much. I won't talk about some of the other things, but what can we do about, in terms of, building relationships better, having more empathy, things like that, which would stop the need for these kind of things?
I think human contact is incredibly important, and we are used to feeling that we're being empowered by technology, but I think that we are further atomized by believing that we're maintaining relationships through social media, for example. We need to actually meet up in the real world. And I would include doing this kind of thing as meeting up in the real world, actually, talking to people face to face. And not, like, for example, I find like Twitter activism, hashtag activism, very worrying, that people feel that they're good people because they've tweeted about something and used the right hashtag. Actually, to change the world, you need to do more. You need to go and organize. You need to write letters to your MP. You need to understand how systems work. When it comes to having a better death, there are surveys that show that 80% of the public support a form of legalization of the right to die. But MPs just cannot countenance it. It's too difficult. It requires too much effort to frame a law in such a way as to make it to make sure that vulnerable people aren't negatively affected by it. But if we pull our voices together and say, no, other countries have been able to do it, we need to be able to work this out, because I do think it's a great injustice of our age that we haven't thought about this more, working out how to do it. So I guess that's a bit of a vague answer, that we need to organise more and do. But I think what we need to do is step away from our computers a bit more and engage with real people, form groups, go and talk, go to meetings, go to things like this, know who your MP is and know what kind of work they're doing, and write to them. Because the danger is we feel like we're engaging with political things by doing very, very superficial things that don't go anywhere ultimately, I would say.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. And I'm sorry we didn't get to some of the questions that were asked, but we'll pursue those in other ways. I want to thank, before we close, particularly Picador Books for supporting this event, and Anna Pillai for working with us on that from Picador. If you'd like to get a copy of Jenny's book, our partners in Waterstones, it's available online, and you can now go into the shops to get it. Just wear your mask, remember, compulsory from Friday. We've got more events coming up in Festival of Ideas Online. Tomorrow night, Masha Gessen from New York will be talking about how we survive autocracy. And if you read Donald Trump's interview at the weekend, where he's possibly he's going to contest the result of the election, this is an essential session to talk about. And next Monday, there's the chance, as Jenny said, to actually question our MPs. 3 of the 4 Bristol MPs will be live with us next Monday lunchtime, talking not about coronavirus, but really about the future. And some of the things that we will be discussing today will be in that as well. If you've been affected by anything that we've discussed, please do check out the details that we've put in the chat and the organisations that can help. Thank you very much. And thank you most of all, Jenny Kleeman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.